Of course, Peter, always thank you very much.
Thank you, James, for a really fascinating talk. That's actually, yeah, I can think of many questions, but I'll try and contain myself. I mean, first up, I guess a lot of the work in regard to the stop signal was probably done with Apis cerana. But we obviously see examples of Apis mellifera having some sort of system like this, in that we see foraging paralysis, which is clearly some sort of element that the bees are, our bees are stopping foraging in response to hornets at the entrance. But I'm sort of wondering whether whether the perception of risk is appropriate. And this is where I'm sort of thinking back to the work by Fabrice that we heard about earlier, where the use of muzzles at the entrance place the hornets further away from the entrance, then basically encourages the bees to carry on foraging. Foraging paralysis can actually, in some circumstances, lead to the demise of a colony, whereas if they continued foraging, the colony actually survives. So it's almost that the perception of risk by an individual is misconceived in terms of the survival of the colony. So I'm just interested in your thoughts on that particular subject.
Great point. Thank you for that question. So we actually have a paper that we're collecting more data on, where we looked at this question of paralysis in common garden experiments between cerana and mellifera. And what we do find is that the foraging of the mellifera is paralyzed, and the colony is not able to perform normally. In fact, we find they would form these large bee carpets where they're just guard bees clustering around the entrance, which is not very effective because the hornets would just pick them off and kill them one by one. What's more interesting for us is this seemed to lead to a kind of colony-level stress response. Almost immediately, within a few days of attacks, the egg laying of the queen dropped significantly. And this eventually led to a cascade of events where the colony would collapse in its population due to a decreased number of workers. So why that occurs is something that we're still looking at, but it's a great example of the kind of overreaction that the Apis mellifera has, but the Apis cerana doesn't have. In a way, it kind of feeds into the fact that they are not, as you mentioned, correctly responding to the attack. Maybe they're overestimating the danger of the hornet. So yeah, I agree that's something that seems to be occurring not only on an individual forager level or guard level, but also perhaps on a colony level.
Good. I don't know if I'm a follow-on question that maybe I could ask. Yeah. So the other thing was in regards to the ICU signal, because you went through the various steps, and also there was the fourth step, which unfortunately didn't show on the slide, which is where the hornet perceives that it has been noticed by too many bees and therefore departs. I wonder if you've sort of taken it even beyond that, in terms of hornets assessing the strength of different colonies, and thereby actually maybe returning to a colony once it's assessed all the colonies, that it picks the weakest one. Is that something you've perceived?
That's something that's quite possible. We haven't formally tested it. What we notice in our apiary is, so we have Apis cerana and Apis mellifera, and the hornets focus a great deal more on the Apis mellifera than the Apis cerana. So I guess that is a partial answer to your question, because the Apis mellifera are inherently weaker. They're less able to withstand the hornet attacks. Among the Apis cerana colonies, we have had problems where the weaker colonies seem to be attacked more. Whether or not an individual hornet is sensing this, remembering that this is a weak colony, basically probing it, as you suggest, and then coming back and recruiting to attack it, that would be a very interesting thing to test. and seems quite feasible.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Other questions, Sandra?
My question is related with the first question of Peter. You showed us that they performed different signals in response to the size of the predator. But there are changes when the number of predators are different, so they can decide different behaviors to perform, or what is the response of the bees according to the number of hunters?
That's a great question, thank you. I think that the signal is tuned not necessarily to the species. For example, this is not a signal that says, I saw Vespa mandarinia versus Vespa velutina, but it actually is according to the danger. So my expectation is that if a bee was attacked by 3 Vespa velutina, that it would produce a higher pitched signal than if it was just attacked by 1. So it probably does perceive the overall danger and then encode that within the signal. It's not communicating the exact species that's causing the danger.
Yes, but what we saw in the hives and in the presentation of Fabrice in the morning is that the paralysis can be triggered by the hornet pressure, meaning that there are many, many hornets in front of the hive, and that is what is triggering the paralysis. So maybe they are also communicating, the bees are communicating that there are a lot of hornets in front of the hive.
That's interesting. So I should distinguish between Apis cerana, the Asian species, which produces the stop signal like this in response to the hornets, and Apis mellifera. Apis mellifera does not seem to have a stop signal that is as complicated as Apis cerana. So yes, when Apis mellifera is attacked at a feeder, it can produce stop signals. But when we've attacked Apis mellifera with hornets at the entrance, we see this kind of paralysis, but we don't hear Apis mellifera producing these stop signals. So we think that this is another reason why Apis mellifera may be more vulnerable to the hornets.
Thank you, James. Other questions in the room? Yes, Julia?
I saw there was a written question. Would hornets be affected by a wave of bees or an ICU video on the screen? I think that's a great, and this is the question from Juliet. So what if we did a playback of a lot of bees doing the ICU signal? Would the hornet run away, fly away? It's a great experiment. We should actually try that and see. My guess is that they would, but maybe over time, they would actually get used to the signal and come back and attack, because they were never actually heat balled. They only see the actual playback of the bees.
Thank you. Other question? I believe that we have a lot of questions for you.
Hi, I'm Julio Maside. Thank you very much for your very interesting talk. I was wondering if we expect the coevolution between the predator and the prey, and would you expect that the European honeybees react differently to, for example, the sound of the flight of the European hornets? Because maybe the lack of response in the European honeybees against Vespa velutina is also related with what they hear, because the sound of the flight are very different between the Vespa velutina and Vespa crabro.
Right. I think that's a very interesting point. There must be something different about what they're sensing. Now, in some cases, these are distinctive subspecies, which are not commonly found and used in apiaries, right? So if we go back to, let me see. No, perfect, wow. By accident, I found the correct slide. So you can see we have Apis mellifera cypria and causica. It's my understanding that these subspecies are actually difficult to find nowadays, because we wanted to do some more research on this. And it would be interesting to see how they respond to Vespa velutina, since we know they respond to Vespa orientalis. This one is interesting. So this one is the European honeybee, Apis mellifera ligustica, and it's responding to crabo, as you said. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure what it is. They must have a way of either smelling or seeing or somehow detecting that this is crabo versus velutina. And so that would be interesting to do a side-by-side experiment.
And just to finish up my questions, if we expect Vespa, the European honeybee, to evolve efficient responses against the Vespa velutina attack, do you expect to exist a variation on the responses in the Vespa, in the Apis mellifera populations, in order to some more efficient responses to be selected for, or are they very or is there very little variation within species in the response?
In terms of what we have seen, we haven't seen much variation in Apis mellifera that we have in China in our apiaries. They all seem to have this kind of paralysis sort of response. Some of them are a little bit more aggressive, and my sense is that the level of aggression or defensiveness of the colony may play a role. In Serena, the response is very similar. Mainly it's tied to the size of the colony. If there are more bees, then you see a stronger response. It would be very interesting in thinking of a practical solution to run a selection experiment in an apiary where you present Vespa velutina, tied as we do on a wire, so they're not actually hurting the bees. And then you basically move it in front of the colonies and see which colonies have a stronger heat falling response, which colonies have more bees that will land and try to attack the hornet. That might actually lead to the selection of bees that are more resistant to hornet attacks. It might also be that you end up selecting more aggressive bees, which beekeepers typically do not like. But again, that might be interesting to see if they can resist Vespa velutina better.
Thank you so much. We have other questions in the chat, the last questions.
Maybe you have responded these three questions, but I put in the same way. Mary asks, was there also audio in IZ signal videos, or was it a visual feed only?
Thank you. So in the ICU signal, there's no audio signal. It is just the visual. And in the playbacks, we don't have any sound in the video at all. So definitely it's purely a visual signal. In the stop signal, of course, there is definitely a sound, which I hope that you were able to hear the sound from the stop signal video.
Also, Isabel asks about easy signal. With AM Apis mellifera or with AC Apis cerana? Only AM or AC or both?
So for the stop signal, both Apis mellifera and Apis cerana can produce it when they are attacked at a food source, like a flower. But when the species are attacked at the nest, which is the main problem for Vespa velutina, only Apis cerana seems to be able to produce the stop signal. We don't hear it from Apis mellifera. I should say also, and you may have seen recent news, a paper came out about Asian honeybees in Vietnam responding to attacks of Vespa soror. And what we find is that similarly, we hear that some of the guard bees are also producing these sounds, which we think are very similar to stop signals when they are attacked at the nest entrance by Vespa velutina. So it seems like a common thing that they do it both inside and outside the nest.
Finally, Tito asks, do AM then have another response to Vespa crab? And would BAC be blind toward an European hornet?
That is a great question. We're actually doing another experiment that I think addresses the question. I think that Apis mellifera ligustica is probably not responding to Vespa velutina because we know that they don't really have this defensive response. But what if Vespa crabo attacks Apis cerana? So our goal now is to create video, and we can artificially change the color and appearance and movement of the video stimuli. So it's almost like a video game for bees. And the goal is, how can we make a butterfly that seems dangerous, and how do we make a hornet that seems harmless? And it seems that we can actually do this. It depends not on the color of the butterfly or the hornet, or how big it is, but actually how it moves. And so when you see a hornet, and you probably see this, the hornet tends to fly more horizontally like this, checking out the actual entrance of the colony. However, when you have a butterfly, the butterfly is kind of moving more randomly in the environment. When we take almost any stimulus and move it back and forth, as if the stimulus is trying to look for the colony entrance, we tend to get the ICU signal. So if Vespa crabo is doing this kind of scanning behavior in front of an Apis cerana colony, I would expect it would elicit the ICU signal, and also heat pollen.
So thank you so much, James. As you can see, your presentation is very interesting. Well, really, we have more questions, but we have to end your time. So thank you so much. That's very interesting, and thank you so much.
Thank you.